Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Steelers Now Pregame Scout. I'm your host, Matt Gajtka, alongside SteelersNow.com analyst Derrick Bell. As less than a week after redefining the term winning ugly, your Pittsburgh Steelers are back on the field, making their Vegas debut. How about that? Something new in this half-century rivalry against the Raiders. It'll be on Sunday night, 8 p.m.-ish Eastern time, so another nationally televised primetime game. Derrick, are the Steelers ready for prime time, though, in the metaphorical sense, based on what we've seen in the first two games?
Yeah, I'm not sure the non-Steelers Raiders fans are going to be too excited about watching this game on Sunday Night Football, especially after they had to endure that really ugly Steelers Browns game just last week in prime time. But hopefully the Steelers can have more effectiveness, I guess, or a better win percentage in Vegas than they did in Oakland. That's the only thing we're really shooting for here.
Yeah, that's true. The old Coliseum wasn't very good to the Steelers, so we'll see how Allegiant Stadium, the Death Star on the Strip, treats them on this trip out west. The Steelers made history last week. I don't know if anyone out there is aware, but they became the first team in NFL history to win a game when their offense didn't run a single play inside the opponent's 30-yard line. Two defensive touchdowns. Actually, the Steelers, for the first time in their history as well, scored a defensive touchdown on the first snap of the game. So they have that going for them. Which is nice. Also, Chris Boswell nailed a couple of 50-plus yard field goals. More on that a little bit later. But as we go into first down here, Derrick, it was a truly offensive performance, and I don't think anyone would disagree for the second consecutive week for the Pittsburgh Steelers attack. I'd say it was hard to get worse than what they did against the Niners. I know they won against the Browns on Monday night, but through two games, the Steelers' offense is averaging 19 yards per drive, 8 offensive points per game. Both of those are worse in the NFL. And if you like the advanced metrics, they're dead last in expected points per play. But more than that, just looking at it through the eye test, way too many plays look just doomed from the start. So if there is an overarching tactical change to make, is there something that the Steelers could do or could have done during this week to unlock something and at least get closer to league average here for week 3?
Yeah, I think when you see a unit struggling like this, really on all cylinders, they're not passing the ball well, they're not running the ball well, they're not blocking well. There's a lot to really unpack in terms of, all right, how do you get this thing on track? But I think that it really boils down to kind of a culmination of a lot needing to be a lot better. The Steelers need to be better in terms of play calling, play sequencing, if you will. They need to be much, much better up front. I thought that the offensive line really kind of doomed the running game on Monday night against the Browns. We talked about that Browns front being pretty good. They've put a lot of investments in the trenches, but, they really got manhandled. It was the offensive line. The tight ends didn't block well. The running backs are pretty much getting hit at or behind the line of scrimmage every single play. And then, the quarterback still looks really out of sorts, man. Aside from George Pickens making a couple really good plays, Pickett for the most part on the night really struggled. You mentioned some of the advanced numbers for the offense in general, but as of right now, Pickett's 32nd, I think, in EPA per play, and then 29th in success rate. I mean, you're not going to be a good offense when your quarterback's playing like that.
Let's dig into that run game a little bit more. Najee Harris, 43 yards, a long run of 21. So on the 9 attempts that weren't that 21-yarder, he averaged just shy of 2 yards per carry. I know that's nitpicking a little bit, or I guess cherry picking some stats, but it matches up with what we're seeing. There's just a lot of plays that aren't going anywhere and leaving the offense in second and third and long. Warren as well, 6 carries for 20 yards in the game against the Browns. And it just looks like at the point of attack, they're getting dominated there. Is there any kind of solution for just getting pushed off the ball? Maybe the Browns and the Niners are going to be in the top end of defending the run, but this is not what the plan was coming into the season. The Steelers were hoping to at least control line of scrimmage a little bit better than this, weren't they?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%, man. I think some of it comes down to, I think guys are maybe potentially being asked to do things that they're not capable of doing. Like some of the reach blocks that they're expecting Mason Cole to do in space is, in my opinion, unrealistic. But then, you're seeing guys just not executing, not generating any type of push or displacement at the line of scrimmage. That's obviously worrisome. I mean, we talk about guys getting hit in the backfield. I mean, Najee has 69 yards rushing after contact this season. He has 74 total rushing yards. So he has 5 total yards before contact. And Jalen Warren's got the same exact split. So it's just when you're asking your running backs to consistently make water out of wine, or wine out of water, I guess you should say. But it's not realistic to think that you're going to be a successful run game. And, even looking forward to this week, we got a battle of kind of just the absolute worst run games in the league so far through 2 weeks. The Steelers have only been successful on 25.9% of their runs, and the Vegas Raiders are dead last at 21.6. So I got a feeling that one of these teams is probably going to break through on Sunday night. We'll see if it's the Steelers or not.
Well, let's move on to second down, but we're going to stick with the offense because especially Kenny Pickett is not progressing as we had hoped he would in his second year. And of course, we will talk more about the play calling and the intricacies there with sequencing and maybe some ways to get creative. So you noted in your film room post this week on SteelersNow.com. And by the way, go to SteelersNow.com for all of Derrick's analysis. And he also posts quite a few tidbits that are teasers, shall we say, on formerly Twitter, now X. So you can see his handle here on the screen in just a second as I'll flash that up. But a lot of breakdowns as usual. Derrick, from you, you noted something pretty interesting, at least from my view, as I read it. You explained that play action typically is a nice security blanket, for lack of a better term, for young NFL quarterbacks. It simplifies the process, maybe gives them a simpler read, also gives defenders something extra to think about. But at the same time, you also pointed out that there were a couple moments in the game against the Browns where Matt Gajtka and the Steelers offense got Pickett in a different look himself, maybe gave him something different to look at as he changed his launch angle or launch spot, as you called it, your throwing platform, whatever you want to call it. They got him moving a little bit, maybe artificial movement in a way, because he's still, quote unquote, in the pocket, but he's getting a little bit out of that flat-footed state and maybe accessing some of that athleticism. So do you think that is a route for Steelers and Pickett to go down, to just try to get him to think a little less and to react a little bit more to what he's seeing?
Yeah, I think, play action has often, been referred to as a little bit of a crutch for some young quarterbacks. Like you said, it kind of simplifies the game a little bit. Teams will oftentimes, go to these kind of max protection looks where you only basically got, 2 or 3 guys out in the route. You're only reading half the field. It just simplifies things and allows them to play a little bit faster. And, they had some interesting, play action wrinkles out of the shotgun. If you've watched a Matt Canada offense, you know that the play action passing game leaves a lot to be desired. They don't use it a ton. Last year they were in the bottom third of the league in play action. They're 29th in usage percentage this year already. They just don't use it a ton, but I thought that they did some interesting stuff out of the gun. That big play to George Pickens for the touchdown obviously was significant. But his second throw of the day was that one that they did move the launch point and kind of hit Pickens on that sail route to the right side of the field. A really good throw. He threw it back shoulder with anticipation. Thought that was one of his more impressive moments. And I just think in general, a lot of that moving the platform stuff was things that, Pickett did during his breakout season at Pitt. You look at some of the numbers, he had a 16-2 touchdown interception ratio off play action at his final season at Pitt. So I think that could potentially be something worth looking into. I mean, we're at a small sample size right now, only about 10 plays of play action to even look at. The problem with everything involving play action really with this offense, though, is the under center stuff, which is typically when you're going to utilize play action more. It's just so disjointed. Every time they try to do it from under center, it just looks like the concepts just make absolutely no sense. They're not putting linebackers in conflict, not utilizing the middle of the field. And that takes away a big portion of what, teams use to kind of boost their quarterback's efficiency. And I think it's definitely something to look at, but Nick Farabaugh from Steelers Now, reporter, he asked Matt Canada about it this week, and it didn't seem like Canada was too thrilled about potentially leaning into more play action. So I don't know if we can really expect to see too much more of it this week against the Raiders.
Well, right. How much of it, the lack of success or the lack of usage of play action, might just be dictated by the fact that the run game isn't that effective. So the defenses aren't honoring that, and thus you still just have to make a play out of the passing game. Do you think the passing game is just going to have a little bit of a breakout eventually in order to open up the run game, if you will? Maybe it's going to be in reverse there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the analytics nerds, if you will, and I'm pro analytics, so I say that with a friendly jab. But analytics will tell you, you don't necessarily need to be a dominant run team to, utilize play action. The linebackers typically will honor that stuff, and you can be really efficient throwing the football regardless, even if you're not great on the ground. But having a good run game does certainly help. Obviously, if you got Adrian Peterson back there, and your play action to him, it's a little bit different than if your play action to a backup. You know what I'm saying? Just from a game planning standpoint, guys are going to flow a little harder. But the Steelers' run issues in the run game could also be, there could be a vice versa kind of effect there. If there is a little bit of a threat of play action, and every time the Steelers get under center, they're not running the football, that could also help open up the run game. So there's kind of a give and take on both sides. That's one of the problems with the Steelers at the moment. And this has really been throughout Matt Canada's kind of tenure with the Steelers. Whenever they're under center, they pretty much exclusively run the ball because they don't have a play action game. It's not the 90s where, quarterbacks are taking traditional 3, 5, 7-step drops from under center without using play action. You just really don't see that anymore. Like the only quarterbacks in the NFL that like that kind of stuff now are like Kirk Cousins. Occasionally you'll see him do it. But so every time they're under center, like defenses are keying run. They're not really worried about the pass. So there's a lot of schematic things that I think go into it that could potentially help this offense break out. But again, there is an execution factor too. Like the offensive line is getting absolutely whooped right now. And that's something that absolutely has to change on Sunday night if they want to come away with a win.
One last thought on Pickett before we move on to the specific matchups against the Raiders here on Sunday. But he strikes me as a guy who looks like he's playing tight right now. So is it more a case of where he's just got to find a way to get into the flow of these games, whether it is by play design or by something else that he's doing? Because he strikes me as the type of player, well, we've always talked about the fact that he escapes the pocket well, but sometimes does it too much. Is there a happy medium there for him, though, like with changing the place where he's throwing the ball from just by a couple of yards? Could that be a long-term solution to get him more of in a flow state as opposed to trying to use the left side of his brain a little bit too much out there and being too mechanical, too robotic, too in his own head, I suppose?
Yeah, I think it's tough, right? Because they've done some things early in the games, some quick throws, things like that I think are trying to get him in a little bit of a rhythm. But when you throw interceptions on your first and second drive in the first couple games, like it's going to do a little bit of a number in terms of like preventing you from getting into that really good rhythm, right? He hasn't started games well, and then he hasn't played well after those mistakes either. So and that's part of playing quarterback, and that's part of being an offensive coordinator is knowing what buttons to push to get your quarterback really comfortable. I do think that maybe utilizing his legs a little bit, getting him out on the perimeter for some easy throws could potentially help. But even then, like when they played the Browns on Monday night, they came out, I think it was halftime. They ran that kind of boot action keeper to the right side of the field, and then he inexplicably threw it right to a Browns defender. Luckily, the guy dropped it. But just some of the decision-making stuff just really doesn't make any sense to me, because I thought, generally speaking, that was a strength of his down kind of the second half of his rookie season. So I'm not really sure what it is what they can really do to get him comfortable. But I think one of the things that could potentially help is, facing this Raiders defense that doesn't have as much, star power or just like overall consistency throughout the full 11 defensive players. Compared to the Browns or, even especially the Niners. This is a less talented Raiders team that they're going to be facing. So hopefully, if they can get in a little bit of a rhythm early, we might see a little bit of a breakout game.
Yeah, let's get into the Raiders. And another 1-1 team. They came back at Denver in week 1, lost to the Bills in week 2, and didn't look very good in losing to Buffalo. That happens. The Bills are a good squad, but The Raiders technically tied for first place, though, in the AFC West as they get set to welcome the Steelers. And for the third straight week, Derek, the Steelers will be facing a stud in terms of rushing the passer. Maxx Crosby's proven to be a menacing figure now in his fifth NFL season out of Eastern Michigan University. Don't often hear about the Eagles getting play at the highest level, but Crosby's come out of there, and he's done quite well for himself. Even if he's maybe not a household name, he's probably been as effective as almost anybody off the edge. He's got 10 pressures and a sack through 2 games. So you've got Chuks Okorafor and whoever else going to have to be aware of what he's doing. Do you anticipate him being as disruptive of a force as we've seen in these first 2 games for the Steelers in terms of guys who've gotten in the backfield? We talked about Bosa, maybe not dominant in game 1, but, clearly was a difference maker in a lot of ways for the Niners. And I know there was a lot of controversy about how well Myles Garrett did in week 2 in comparison to TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith on the Steelers side, but it was still a guy you had to game plan for. So how do you see this matchup going with, a big-time rusher on the other side of the football?
Yeah, a little bit about Crosby, man. Crosby is probably one of my favorite defensive players to watch in the league. I think that he's just absolutely fantastic, not just as a pass rusher, but as a run defender as well. Elite athlete, elite get off, really good hand usage for a pass rusher. He presents a lot of problems because he can win on the outside shoulder. He has a set of counters, can win on the inside. He can win pretty much even his one sack. I wouldn't call him like a overly powerful guy, even though he has decent length. His one sack this year was off a bull rush. So like he can beat you in so many different ways. Okorafor is going to have his hands kind of full on Sunday night because he lines up pretty much on that side of the field almost exclusively. But I think you do have to feel pretty good about the Steelers' game plan for, how they scheme around some of these elite pass rushers. You mentioned Bosa and Myles Garrett. Both of those guys had really flashy moments whenever they were left one-on-one, but the Steelers just didn't give them that many opportunities. And that's kind of the game plan. You're going to give them a lot of help with tight ends and running backs. And, there's disadvantages to that too. Not getting as many people out in the route is less, people for those guys that defend in the secondary. So there's disadvantages, but you got to do what you got to do. And I think that, the Steelers are going to provide a similar blueprint and kind of continue to follow that with Maxx Crosby. They're going to try to, give Okorafor as much help as possible. The Steelers really need to do a better job. We said this last week on the show, but they didn't do it. They really need to do a better job staying out of 3rd and longs. We mentioned the lack of success running the football. That definitely hurts that. But if you continuously get in these, 3rd and 8s, 3rd and 9s against Crosby, to where they're going to scheme up, some 5-man pressures to where you're going to have to leave Okorafor one-on-one, or you're going to have to leave 6-7 guys in protection, that's going to end very poorly. You don't want to let him completely just wreck the game plan.
How about the Raiders offense against the Steelers defense? Like I said at the top, Steelers D did everything that was asked and more, of course, scoring a couple of touchdowns. That's not going to happen every week, but they were primetime ready, I suppose you could say, against the Browns. And now they get another chance on a national stage against the Raiders. Jimmy Garoppolo's in charge of that offense now, in case you haven't been keeping track of that. But rushing the ball, Josh Jacobs off to a slow start. He's averaged about 4.5 yards per rush over the course of his career. So far this season, though, Derek, he's right around 2. So what do you think is going on there? And are the Raiders dangerous enough, consistently enough, to give the Steelers a real test on that side of the ball?
Yeah, it's really interesting because the Steelers' run defense has really struggled through 2 weeks. It's probably been the biggest blemish on that side of the football. And Jacobs, we mentioned both teams are really struggling to run the ball. It's weird to me how it doesn't look like anything that the Raiders are doing schematically that's different from last year. In my film study, they're using a lot of fullback, a lot of 2-back sets. They like their 12 personnel. They like to bring a lot of bodies to the party, but honestly, they're not kind of similar things that I'm seeing with the Steelers. They're not winning up front at all. And I also think that Josh Jacobs, to me, looks a little bit sluggish. He had the contract dispute. To me, it looks like he's still kind of working his way into game shape. But the numbers for Jacobs are absolutely horrendous. I mean, he's got 28 carries on the season for 46 yards. He's averaging 1.6 yards per carry. I mean, that's just absolutely awful. But one of the ways that I think is kind of changing, and I think it has more to do with Jimmy G than anything else, is the Raiders are seeing a higher rate of middle field close coverage, so they're seeing a lot of safeties roll down towards the box instead of last year where Devontae Adams, Derek Carr, that connection, they were seeing a lot of too high stuff. Well, that's going to be easier to run the football against. That's what offensive coordinators want to do. You see too high, you run the football. Well, now it seems like defenses are keying the run a little bit more. That could be in response to Jacobs' season last year, but I actually think it's probably more to do with the fact that Jimmy G refuses to throw the ball deep, especially down the sideline. And until he hits some deep shots, whether that's to Adams or Trey Tucker, Jacoby Myers, whoever, I think that teams are going to be very comfortable living in that world with just the middle field safety and trusting the corners on the outside until Jimmy G proves that he could beat them.
What do you think is up with the Steelers' run defense? We've seen Christian McCaffrey go for 152 in the opener, including a 65-yard touchdown. And then Jerome Ford, after the grotesque injury to Nick Chubb last week. By the way, Chubb was averaging over 6 yards per carry on 10 attempts before the Minkah Fitzpatrick low hit sent him out for the season. Then Jerome Ford, 106 yards on 16 carries, a 69-yard run for him. No touchdowns for the Browns from either of those top two runners. But at the same time, the Steelers were getting gashed, even though they did a pretty good job of keeping the Browns out of the end zone and off the scoreboard enough to win the game. So we're seeing some secondary issues, it looks like. Some players on the other side, some rushers breaking contain from the Steelers defensive backs, just not being able to pin these guys to one side of the field or the other. That's what I see through my layman's glasses here. What are you seeing from your expert lens?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think the number one thing, man, is explosive runs allowed is just an absolute killer. It's just one of the things that will drive coaches absolutely insane, and for good reason. I mean, I think that you look at the issues in the run game, the Christian McCaffrey run in week 1, and then you even look at last week's Jerome Ford run. Really, Levi Wallace was probably the most at fault for both of those. He misses a tackle on McCaffrey in week 1. Week 2, he loses contain on that cutback, allowing Ford to go up the left sideline for however many yards that was, 70 yards or whatever. So, corners not being good in run support, that's a big issue. Not tackling well in space, that's a big issue. I also thought that there was a couple times in the first 2 weeks where the linebackers, they didn't necessarily make the defensive linemen right. So they're jumping into the wrong gap. You got multiple guys in the same gap, allowing for easy cutback lanes, things of that nature. And then there's obviously, the fact that they're missing Cam Hayward. I mean, one of the absolute best run defenders in the league over the last, decade or however long. And, that guy has been one of the most effective guys at the point of attack facing double teams. And his just ability to hold the point of attack, generate, penetration into the backfield is something that they're not going to be able to replace with just one person or really with this group in general. It's something that you're going to have to just kind of deal with and try to, neutralize as much as possible until he's able to make his return. So I think it's a lot of different factors, but for me, it's one thing to struggle against the run or, you're allowing teams to kind of grind you down or whatever. At least you're competing. But I think that the explosive run aspect of it is something that they absolutely have to get a bit better handle on moving forward, starting on Sunday night.
Okay, let's go to fourth down here. The third phase of the football game last week. Pretty good for the Steelers, most particularly the guys who kicked the ball. We're going to leave Gunnar Olszewski's weird toe tap on the sideline out of this one because what more can we say about that? But Chris Boswell, I said at the top of the show, 250-yard plus field goals. So hopefully he's on track to erasing some of that negative mojo from last week. Mike Tomlin can say mojo, so I'll say mojo as well in a positive way this time around. Also, Presley Harvin, the third, struggled in week 1 for the most part. He had a couple of decent punts there. The standard's been low for him, though, at least in terms of what we've been used to seeing from him as he's in his now third season in the NFL. We expected a lot from him. The Ray Guy winner, unanimously voted in Division I NCAA. Can maybe now finally he's accessing some of that potential. He had 4 punts downed against the Browns inside the 10-yard line. Forget the 20. He had 4 inside the 10. Some of that's good fortune. Some of that's good luck. But at the same time, we're seeing some flashes here. So, what do you think is more important, though, in terms of what the Steelers can do this year? Is it having an actual competent or maybe even above average punter, or is it getting Chris Boswell back to that? Well, you can call it Pro Bowl form that he was in for several seasons in his career.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, both are probably equally important, but I think a good punting game is probably, that was huge on Monday night just because of how bad the Steelers offense is. If it continues to be that bad and they're not giving Boz a ton of chances to kick field goals, I guess the punter probably will be more important to flip field position, at least to give your defense a chance. But yeah, I thought that, both of those guys ended up on, my winners list, the do's and does list, if you will, post game. And, Boz, 250-yard field goals in a division game like that's highly contested. I think that deserves praise on its own. But Harvin, you talked about the expectations. They've been pretty low, but he hasn't even been meeting those. Just the overall inconsistencies of his play through the last couple of seasons have been maddeningly frustrating. But Mike Tomlin, he didn't. I mean, he bluntly called him out in the presser last week. Said that his play was absolutely not good enough. They brought in Brad Wing for a through the week tryout. They very much, I feel like, put him on notice and said, like, hey, look, this leash is getting a little shorter. We need to see some success out there. And Harvin, to his credit, man, he really delivered in a game that the Steelers really needed it. And I always think it's awesome to see guys respond to that adversity, respond to the criticism, not just from the fan base, but when your own coach goes in front of the media and kind of lights a fire underneath you. I think Harvin definitely deserves praise for that. We'll see if he can generate some consistency and keep this moving forward. I have definitely more faith that Boz will, get back to his self that we're used to more so than Harvin. But, you got to start somewhere, man. And Sunday night or Monday night was a pretty good start for both of them.
Yeah, as far as kickers go, they're remarkably consistent when you look at year over year. Field goal made percentage, for the most part, it stays the same over the course of a career. Sometimes it can be an extremely long career, like guys like, Morton and Gary Anderson, the Andersons, I should put it that way. Jason Hanson as well comes to mind as guys who've been able to kick into their 40s. Boswell has that look, or had that look until last year, and then it got a little scary at times with some of those misses. But it's like a golfer or a pitcher. It's all about mechanics. Whether you can handle the pressure, of course, is part of that. But a lot of times it is a mechanical glitch that just gets inside your head and becomes a rut. So hopefully Boswell's beyond that. You can take the whole offseason to work on that as a kicker. That's, excuse me, the best part is there's just one part of the job that's important. And so you can nail that down and make a really nice career out of it and become a real difference maker or return to being a difference maker for your squad. Derrick, I haven't asked you the first 2 weeks for a prediction. I guess I feel like maybe I should, right? Let's get into that prediction game, not to get on the radar of old takes exposed or anything like that, but
Right.
let's put it on the line here. What do you think is going to happen on Sunday night?
I'm going to pick the Steelers to win. This is a game that I feel pretty confident about, mainly just because after watching the Raiders offense just on film earlier in the week, I feel pretty good about where the Steelers defense is going to be at. I don't know that Jimmy G is going to be able to hurt them deep enough, and the Raiders' run game has been disastrous. This is kind of a get-right game for either the Steelers' run defense or the Raiders' run game. I have a little bit more faith in the Steelers' defense than anything else, but to me, I just haven't been overly impressed with Jimmy G. There are some good aspects of the Raiders offense that I'll talk about real quick. They've been excellent in pass protection, so this will be a really good test for Alex Highsmith, TJ Watt, and those guys. Jimmy G's been the least pressure quarterback in the league. They've got some interesting weapons. Obviously, Devontae Adams, guy that you absolutely can't leave single covered. The Steelers pretty much doubled him throughout the game last week, or last year, I should say. But, it'll be an interesting time. I think the Raiders on defense, obviously we talked about Maxx Crosby. Their two safeties, Trayvon Merrick and Marcus Epps, are playing really good football. I'm not overly enthusiastic about the Raiders linebackers, though. I think the Steelers should try to exploit that. I think that they've got some corner issues as well. Jacorian Bennett, a rookie, he's playing a lot, shadowing the other team's best receiver. And then Marcus Peters, who I think is, probably a little bit past his prime as well. But there's some matchups I think that really favor the Steelers. It'll be interesting to see if they're able to take advantage of those. I'm nervous about picking the Steelers to beat the Raiders, especially on the road. But like I said at the top, man, I'm hopeful that their luck in Vegas is going to be better than it was in Oakland.
Luck in Vegas. I see what you did there. And yeah, it is a totally different thing now. I know it is the Raiders. It's the same team, the same uniforms they've had forever. But also, they're in Nevada now. And this is a totally different atmosphere as well. I expect to see a lot of Steelers fans there in Vegas, including a couple members of my extended family who happen to live out that way. I'm sure they'll be twirling the terrible towel, as we often see on the road for the Steelers. No one travels better than them in the NFL. And also remember last year, Kenny Pickett, maybe not his finest moment. I'd probably say the win at Baltimore was a highlight, or the highlight, but he led that last-minute touchdown drive to win the game against Vegas on the 50th anniversary of the Immaculate Reception, and just after Franco had passed away. So a lot going on there, and he came through. Maybe seeing that Raiders logo on the helmet will trigger something in him and get him going, because Pittsburgh absolutely needs it. Okay, a reminder here as we wrap up the show. Visit SteelersNow.com and follow at PGH Steelers Now, I should say, for all the coverage we've got, both pregame and postgame, of Steelers Raiders. They get together once again, but with a new twist on the 50-plus-year-old rivalry. I'm Matt Gajtka. That's Derrick Bell. We'll talk to you next week on the Steelers Now Pregame Scout.